Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see so many of you, and in a funny, perverse way, so many of you that I don't know and I've never met before. And perhaps you personify the how am I sitting right this moment with the uncertainty of who is here, why are you here, what are you hoping for? And I wonder how I'm going to hold that with us all today. Welcome also to those of you that I do know, some familiar faces. It's lovely to see you again. Thank you for coming. And maybe if I start with, there's a certain irony in the title of this session, in Sitting with Uncertainty, What Might Supervision Provide? I was in my gym yesterday doing a workout, and a friend asked me, "What are you doing this week?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing a webinar for my professional body around sitting with uncertainty." And he said, "Are you looking forward to it?" And I said, "Well, sort of, because yes, I am, because I love being here in these sort of initiatives. And at the same time, it just rose up in me. I'm going to be sitting with a group of 100+ people, many of whom I don't know, without the time to get to know you, without the time to build relationship of any depth. And I wonder what everybody's expectations will be, because I may not be able to meet all or some or any of the expectations. And actually, it sort of captured the parallel process for me sitting here with you of what happens for a team coach when we go into an organization and we have a leadership team, we have a C-suite organizational team, and they sit there and I wonder what they are waiting for and what are their assumptions and their hopes and their fears and their projections onto us as team coach or as supervisor of team coaches. So we have a wonderful parallel process here. The other thing about sitting with uncertainty, perhaps let me clarify, I don't have a strict agenda. I don't use lots of slides, but there will be some. There'll be a reading list afterwards for some of you who like to learn through reading. And I'm hoping that we can actually have breakout and dialogue in plenary, breakout and dialogue in plenary. And maybe, if time allows, we'll do a case study so that you can unravel some of this and this whole zone of uncertainty for yourselves. What I would like you to do is take a moment for yourselves and just notice how you're feeling individually without being quite sure who I am or what I may be bringing and what you may be hoping for. So you may want to jot something down. You may want to just access how you're feeling, notice your excitement, your curiosity, your anxiety, your tension, and how does that inform how you sit with uncertainty for yourselves when you go into client situations, group situations. So just take a moment and then I'll read you a poem. This is a poem by Nora Bateson, and Nora Bateson, as many of you may know, works with an approach called warm data, and I've become increasingly interested in her work because she allows for emergence, for co-creation, for the unexpected, and holds a question around what can we learn from nature rather than what is a linear structure that goes from A to B to C to D. And I love that because we're human and it means that we can be as individual as we need to be. The poem is called Symathesy, which is an unusual word, and there's a definition at the end of the poem. So let me read this to you. Each one of us is a crooked tree. reaching for water and light, bending ourselves around obstacles, scary thoughts, hurtful moments, darkness and thirst, finding a way to breathe in the sun and hold the soil. Our branches are kinked and twisted because that is what took to be here. The ways of learning to be in our worlds have shaped our responses. Our many experiences are speaking through every gesture, our loves, broken paths, a tenderness, a criticism, learning always, yearning always in crooked beauty, to be a home for those who may find comfort in the asymmetry of our belonging, a nest cradling new life, tucked into an old log, teeming with creatures, learning to be in each other's reshaping. So in setting that scene, what I'd now invite you to do, because you're a sea of faces and some of you may or may not know each other, but I would hope potentially we can have a dialogue once we have made some other connection other than Cheryl and me and Rosie in my top left-hand corner, my technical supporter, to hear from you. But in your breakouts, the question I would invite you to share with each other is less about how many hundreds of years of experience you may or may not have, or how many badges or how many certificates you may or may not have, but to ask the question, what impact does uncertainty have on you? And I would add, particularly in groups. And that question is now going to go into the chat, and you can go into your breakouts. And I think we said 15 minutes, didn't we, Rosie? So 15 minutes in your breakouts to introduce yourselves. Yes, find out a bit about each other, asking the question, what does uncertainty mean to you? How does it show up for you? And then when you come back, I'll ask you to put the questions that have come out of your breakout into the chat, and we'll move to the next stage of having some plenary to respond to the questions that you're bringing into our conversation this afternoon. Another example for you of, I have no idea what you're going to come back with. So how do I sit with that? How do you sit with that when you're with a team or with your groups in supervision? So over to you, please, Rosie, for breakouts.
We have a first question. How does uncertainty impact on the desire to control outcomes in team coaching?
That's a wonderful question, Katie. That's a wonderful question. What is our need for control for the outcome? And how do we sit with that may or may not be happening? Great. Curiosity in what strategies different ones of us use to help ease the discomfort of uncertainty and to lean into the discomfort of not knowing. How can one lower one's anxiety before starting a team coaching? How does answering to a question already connect us to uncertainty? With a group, everything is per se uncertain. Therefore, how do we sit with our performance anxiety? Wonderful.
This is a good one. Would you advise creating uncertainty as a tool to use in group coaching?
The impact of uncertainty depends on the context. Do I feel curious or anxious about how I'm showing up? Wonderful. How do we dance between uncertainty and impermanence ourselves and work with the team accordingly? And how to use optimally the useful aspects of uncertainty. And when working with different team dynamics, how can a team coach ensure collaboration and buy-in for change? Create uncertainty to break excessive, non-productive predictability. Why does it seem so difficult to link hope with uncertainty? Wow, we could be here all day. This is wonderful. I hope you're not hoping that I'm going to give you the answers to all of this. How to create psychological safety in a meeting with a group, knowing that uncertainty is a human experience in general. Well, we'll have to find out how I'm doing that, or how we are creating psychological safety here for us, won't we? Knowing the uncertainty is human experience. Why do we assume certainty is desirable and uncertainty is not? Well done, Alex. I can see where that question comes from. Are we natural nomads, or rather more in need of certainty? Copyright, Alex. Okay, how much uncertainty can we tolerate? Internal uncertainty versus uncertainty. Just a few ideas and questions. Many thanks to our beautiful ladies. And depending on the context, in today's context of this webinar, I feel excited, curious, positive expectations, uplifted energy of new learning with my tribe. In other context of tomorrow's meeting, I feel nervous, in search to be prepared, in control, question mark, preparing to have facts, anxious, in search to be heard and understood. Oh gosh, this is gorgeous. How on earth do we tackle all of this? Wow. I have no idea. So where do we go? Where do we go? As I think about it, these are wonderful. Thank you so much. It sounds as though your check-ins with each other were really productive and thought-provoking. And if you like, that's what these global summit dialogue series are all about. Because I certainly don't hold the answers. I hold some for my own experience and practice, and I can offer some ideas. But I think it sounds from your questions about how you're all holding the question, how do we hold or not hold and sit with uncertainty? And you may have noticed from the title of my session, because those of you who know me know I work as a supervisor of team coaches, I've got to mention, what role might supervision play in supporting us as we sit with our clients' uncertainty, our own uncertainty, and where can we take that to find our ground again, to be able to continue to be out there and be open and available and co-create the conditions that enable people to show up. So where do we start? Where do we start? At the beginning of the day, earlier today, when Cheryl and Rosie and I were getting prepared, Cheryl asked me if I do this as a regular webinar or as a regular podcast, and I said absolutely not. But when Nicola from EMCC said, Alison, will you come and do a global GPS dialogue? I thought, what on earth what shall I offer today that may be relevant to me and or each other in the field as we're living it at the moment? And for many of you, both with your team coaching and with your supervision, for me, the recurring theme is, how do I stay grounded when there is so much going on around me, both politically, geographically, economically, societally, naturally, globally? And how do we come back to ourselves to have a foundation, to have a scaffolding that enables us to sit with being here in relationship with each other? And I'm finding, certainly in supervision, we sit with how are we each responding and being with each other that may help ground us to go be out there in the chaos and the uncertainty of the client environments that we're working in. I'm going to pause for a second because I was aware when I came in that I'm making a lot of assumptions here about us as a group. And from your questions, I think my assumption was okay, because what I'm hearing is you are asking yourselves these questions about uncertainty in a world that is very unpredictable. And it didn't need me to do a lecture on team coaching is uncertain and unpredictable, and we need to control it. Maybe if I give a little bit of background, I guess my own path has been to become less linear, less structured, less going from A to B to C to D, because whilst there are lots of frameworks for coaching, for team coaching, for supervision, actually, when two people or a group of people come into the room, we cannot know what might happen unless we try and control it. I was with a group the other day, and I introduced myself and said that there was we were following a path, but it was going to be rather a flowing path. And a member of the group said, well, I need to have some structure to feel safe here. Okay, well, and I thought, oh, how am I going to deal with that? Because I don't have a structure. And it was, okay, well, maybe find out what's the structure that's needed. And the person needed to know what we were going to do between 9 and 11, and what we were going to do between 11 and 1. And after lunch, what would we do between 2 and 3:30 for tea? And what would we do between 3:30 and 5? And as soon as I put those times in and said, we're going to do a bit of this and a bit of that, and it may change after lunch, everybody's shoulders went down. Everybody relaxed a bit. So there's something, isn't there, in our field, in the wider field of organizations, of teams, of our lives, that there's something about what certainty do each of us need for us to be able to show up as fully and as authentically and professionally as we can. Now, I want to go back to the very first question that came out. How does uncertainty impact on the desire to control outcomes in team coaching? And I think there are lots of questions here, which I love. But for me, that really jumped out at me, because for many of you, imagine going into team coach assignments, your client has an expectation of outcome, even if they can't name it. And the challenge can be that they project onto the coach that the coach is going to create the outcome. And how do we unplug ourselves from the expectation that if I use this chair I'm sitting in now, I am not going to control the outcome of this webinar. I'm going to manage the team, the time. I'm going to give some input. I'm going to hear from you, but I have no control over the outcome. And that's got to be okay. And how do we develop our capacity to sit with the fact that I cannot control the outcome for each of you of what you take away from today? And I think for me, that's been my work for me. How do I let go of needing to control the outcome of why we're here? I can take us through a pathway, but I have no idea which paths and which subpaths and which different directions each of you may be going. So let me pause And I need to open this up. I can't bear all this talking about me, me talking. Would anybody like to add something so far from what the questions have brought, and or what you're hearing, that you would like to contribute into this conversation before I show a bit of theory and a bit of a map and stuff like that? Please don't be shy. You're all executive coaches. You're all in the public domain. Please don't be shy. You can't get it wrong. There's no wrong way to talk into this space.
Hi, Alison. I just popped in there because when you were talking, and again, I was looking through some of the questions that came up. The first thing that came up was sort of like, how much courage do we have in certain situations, and our ability to bring healthy challenges to some of the demands that are actually placed on us in our roles as team or group coaches or supervisors. And I think there's an inner confidence there that potentially is always being built and always being developed within ourselves that can really help us through challenging times.
Oh, that's lovely, Joe. Thank you. Because what you're naming for me is, and I may not call it courage, but there's something here about, look at those gorgeous questions and comments that you've shared, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, I could get overwhelmed, or I could say, well, I'll focus on one or two and let go of the need to answer all of them. And for me, this is a practice. It's very easy to get hooked into, oh, I need to, I should, I must, I ought. And so it takes courage to say, okay, I can't answer all of them. You can answer some of these for yourselves. That's lovely, Joe. Thank you. Would anybody else like to add something?
Yeah, can I just add from my personal experience? When I experience uncertainty that is above my threshold, a capacity to accommodate at that moment in time, it's almost an invitation to myself to turn the spotlight towards myself. How am I managing it? What am I grounding? How am I grounding? What are my value system? Let's say it's a decision or all the chatter around me, absolutely.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it's almost an invitation to connect back to myself, to say, the only certainty I have here is me. So from that foundational ground, what can I see? What can I hear? What can I decide? And how can I move forward? And that's every single time there has been a wave of change around me, I see myself grounding back to myself. And that's a little practice that I have for myself. So that's what I'll.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Dee. So we've got Joe's courage and we've got your grounding back to yourself. I'm sure each of you may have your methods or your techniques. And it's wonderful to hear what they may be, because we can't control anybody else. So how do we come back to ourselves? Anne?
Yeah, it's a question. Hi, Alison. I mean, I love the poem that you brought, and I love what we're talking about uncertainty, which I think is natural to have that uncertainty. My concern is, are the people that we're team coaching working directly with us, or are we working with the organization? And whose expectations are we meeting? Because we may work exactly correctly for the coachees, but the organization might not like it because they have an agenda that they want you to meet. And that's where I think it becomes more confusing.
Yes, that's good. And how do you deal with it, Anne?
I don't know. I mean, you can have a good contracting with the organisation, but often the HR or the OD people who are buying people in, they don't really understand the nature of the liminal space that you're pointing to, or the unknown, and how the emergent often comes out of the unknown. So how do we educate, in some ways, people to understand that that's what's involved in team coaching?
I think that's gorgeous, Anne. I'm aware there's more folks talking in chat, which is lovely, but let's stay with that, because I think one of the things that I pick up with many team coaches is that they can get swept into the urgency and the outcomes and the achievements that are declared or wanted, and may move perhaps too quickly in trying to get a process in place and get the order and get the structure and get the procedure so that everybody is certain about what's going to happen, knowing that full well it's not going to happen like that. And certainly when the organization may have other priorities that we may or may not be privy to. So if we take Anne's point, it's quite interesting, isn't it, to think that do we go to the wider system other than the team that briefs us to say, what is the organizational expectation? What place do we have with them as the team coach or a dyad of team coaches to attend to the wider system in which a team may be operating? So that's lovely, Anne. Thank you. Andrew, I'd love to hear from you, and then Anya.
Yeah, Alison, thank you. Building on the comment you were just making with Anne, it's also sometimes the opposite. There's also the danger that we go off into a systemic spiral, and actually the group is wanting us to do something really specific and productive. I had that recently with a group last year where I suddenly realized I was trying to bring in a very large holistic lens, and they were really wanting to move on. And therefore, therefore this point about control was just let it go. Okay, off we go. Let's try and do something different, maybe that's going to resolve some more immediate issues that you feel you have, and that will then allow me then to come back in later.
Oh, that's lovely, because I think the thing that I pick up, Andrew, with many folks who have perhaps had a certain type of team coach training, they have a guide that this is my process. I'm going to go from here to here to here to here. And if you've gone off-piste out into the wider system and the holistic approach, and the client team wants something very precise, we have to learn to dance, don't we? We have to move from a waltz together to a boogie around the room or around with each other, or a Charleston with somebody else, or a polka across the room with a group. So our capacity to go with the unpredictability, that's lovely. Thank you. Anya, hello.
Yes, hello. I'm sitting with relying on the partnership, the alliance I might have with my co-coach, because I'm very rarely doing team coaching alone. Plus, since I became a supervisor, I have a magic question. What's the parallel process in here? And this makes me become more conscious, or quickly conscious of, I'm being hooked by the group's tension, expectation, whatever, and I'm feeling it inside of myself. So when I become conscious of it, most of the time I name it to the group, and then something changes. So now I'm really confident that bringing those things, signals, consciousness, whatever, to the group is highly powerful. I don't know what will come out of it, but from my experience, 100% of time, something else happens that's useful for the group.
Wonderful. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the parallel process notion. In a way, I use that here to say I'm sitting with a parallel process of I'm sitting with a group of unknown, unexpected, unassumed, don't know much about it. So how am I managing my own uncertainty and noticing, inviting you to sit with what are you noticing with the uncertainty to engage in this. Sadly, time doesn't allow for us to look at what does parallel process means. You can read about it from the reading list. I don't mean to cut you short, but thank you, because I've just done a series of workshops with a colleague as dyad supervisors. And it was phenomenal how we had to work so hard at being transparent about our process to enable the participants to see that we weren't being mysterious and we weren't hiding anything and we weren't trying to be clever. And they found it really productive when they could see why we were doing what we were doing, and we'd talk about our method and our approach out loud. So maybe there's something in managing our own uncertainty and being transparent about that gives permission for others to be transparent about their own uncertainty and normalizing it without laboring it. So thank you, Anya. That's great. What I want to do, so that some people who are a different way of learning, who might like to get a bit of structure in here, what I would like to do is introduce those of you who may not be familiar to my map of the territory of team coaching. This is slightly old. I've done a new one from this, but this gives you what I'm talking about managing uncertainty. And the whole idea of this came from the fact that I resist these days working in a linear way. So here we have the territory of team coaching. It's not linear. It's to give you, and I've called it mapping the territory, because we don't know where we might go. Coming back to Andrew's point, when the team wanted something precise, it was, well, what was the purpose of the work? But outside of that, there are all these other elements going on. Now, this may look a bit overwhelming for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, but the reason that the gray arrows are here is because when one thing changes, everything else will change. It's a bit like a kaleidoscope. Now, at the moment in this map, the coach or the coaches are in the middle. And when I developed this, David Clutterbuck said, Alison, why are the coaches in the middle? And I thought, well, because in supervision, they're in my middle, they're my focus of attention. And the coach brings these different elements, these different phenomena into the room. They might want to talk about some of the individual participants. They might want to look at their contracting with the organization. They might want to look at the leadership specifically. They might want to look at any challenges that they're facing with the team or with themselves in the work. So this is not a how-to procedure, and it's not it's a bit like, well, if you're going into the jungle, how do you find your way through, and how do we develop our capacity to pay attention where the attention may be sought and what may be being forgotten? So, for instance, I may work with a team that the leader is very powerful, very charismatic, is definitely the leader of the group. But in the meantime, we have over here, I may have forgotten that the relationships between the team members, I may have neglected because I'm hooked into the relationship with the leader. And I may have forgotten that there are some individual participants who don't like the leader, but don't know how to say so. So I offer this as a guide. It's not a how-to, it's an aid memoir when you're perhaps looking at your team coaching, when you're looking at a client assignment. Where does our focus go and how does our focus change? So I want to pause to see if anybody would like to add anything or ask questions. There are slides for this with the detail. Each slide has the detail much greater than each of these with the small print. But would anybody like to comment or ask a question about the map?
So we have a question in
Yep.
the chat box. Where does the team purpose and/or primary task fit in the map?
Over here, we've got the team and the group development. And we might get it through here with the contracting. Who is involved? What's the purpose of the intervention? How do we engage the team? Who does the initial contracting? Who does the recontracting? So those two are closely allied, connected, aren't they, at different times? And then we have the leader who may have his purpose for the team, but then he may not want to involve the individual participants. He may want to give me as a team coach a précis of all the team members. But do I do individual interviews with the participants before we engage? So I hope that attends to it. Agnes.
Yeah, thank you for letting us know your own tool for that. I have another one that's simpler, and I'm getting conscious that showing that type of tool to the team also offers them consciousness of how complex it is
Yes.
to be a team and to work with a team as a coach.
That's gorgeous, Agnes, because I too have done that. Because to show that when the client may say, we've only got this amount of time, or we've only got this budget, we'll say, okay, well, let's have a look. If we look at the purpose of the work, what you would like this team to achieve, and how many people are involved, and what stage of development the team is at, and what's the culture of the organization that's going to support this change, and what are all the dynamics that may be going on in a team that doesn't know each other, and all the relationships between the team members, between the team roles. This perhaps may explain, Mr. and Mrs. Client, why this takes time and we can't rush it. We might get a little bit done and we can tick a box and say, yep, we've done some team stuff. But this developmental work for a team of the individuals to co-create their relationships and improve those to be more effective to achieve a common purpose is the thing that can take time. And our own urge to have a definite outcome or to get a goal can get hooked up by the client's urgency. So I'm going to come out of there and see if there are any other comments. Anne, yes.
I notice on your model, there's an area for the psychodynamics or the psychological.
Yes.
I'm making an assumption that all people who are going to do team coaching have had some psychotherapy training or psychological training in order to be able to do that. Because if they're not informed, how will they know how to work with the dynamics and the unconscious elements that goes on in a group?
Gorgeous. So thank you. I brought us back to the map, and it's this area, Anne, that you're referring to, the psychological
phenomena.
Yes, okay. So you've highlighted a really important aspect, and the thing that I guess I've really valued in the professional bodies, acknowledging the psychological development and emotional development of the practitioners. This is not just a how-to, and this is a work on self and self-awareness and our capacity to be in relationship. And that involves looking at our family patterns. What did we learn in our families of origin? What did we learn when we were younger? It gets us also to look at, well, when we come into a room, what are we projecting onto the other? What do we bring in from outside that we may have had somewhere else that we're now bringing in here? What are things like the elements of power and competition? And how do I feel about that? How do you feel about competition? Are we vying for position? And how do we co-create? How do we create a container as a team coach that enables people to feel trust, but we cannot promise it and we cannot guarantee it? And what happens when somebody suddenly gets really disturbed and upset by something another member of the team says that none of us expected or knew would happen? And what is our capacity as a team coach to be able to hold that, sit with it, manage the group at the same time? So more and more I'm hearing, Anne, that coaches who are becoming team coaches once they get over the shock of realizing that team coaching ain't just an extension of individual, that there's a complexity in how groups grow and develop and co-create and interact and disrupt, this is where the work is for ourselves in being able to do that. So thank you for mentioning that.
Alison, we have a couple of questions in the chat box.
Great.
I can share them with you.
Thank you.
So from Carissa, we have, when contracting the organisation with this non-linear process, what have you found most useful and not?
Thank you, Carissa. What if I went with the co-contracting with non-linear? This, I don't have the exact answer to this. I'm speaking aloud. I'm thinking aloud with this question, Carissa. It's lovely because I think there's something here about how do we normalize human behavior and human relationships and the unpredictability of it all. And perhaps a conversation with the client who may want something more structured and linear to say, yep, we can put a skeleton in place, but let's have a look at relationships. Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, let's have a look at some of the more interesting relationships you have with friends or colleagues, and which relationships do you enjoy, which ones have taken hard work, which ones are really difficult, which ones do you avoid? And I tend to ask them to have a look at what is it about the relationships with and from and between each other that allow and enable progress, and normalizing that human beings have to get to know each other, to build trust, to build confidence, takes time. And sometimes a leader may not have the patience or the understanding or the awareness or the desire to engage in that inquiry, firstly for themselves and then for their team. But there's something about painting the picture of normalizing human beings rather than this is the finance director, this is the accountant, this is the marketing director, this is the lead, this is the CEO, this is the HR director. So, Carissa, I don't know if that's answered or attended a little bit to your question. It's a lovely question. Thank you.
So then we have a question, we have a couple of questions actually from Alex, who says culture is part of the picture and so are the formal political structures. Where does hierarchy and politics come in? He also says it's a brilliant map, Alison.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, where does politics fit? Well, I guess I would put politics in the culture. I'd also put it into the wider system. I'd also put it into what is the team's relationship with itself? What are the different relationships? And I guess it also comes in this notion of competition and power. And if you like, I've found quite a lot of people working with this map is that they actually annotate with things like this, Alex, that they add things like politics into this. I've not named it here. I think in a later version, I've got politics in there because it goes on, doesn't it? And we could say in the culture, or I put here things like norms and habits and patterns and assumptions. So often I hear in a general cultural phenomenon is the whole notion of blame. My team is dysfunctional. Oh, yeah. Oh, what part are you playing in that, my lad, my lord? What part are you playing in that? So this is not complete. Add to it, doctor it, adapt it to the themes that you're finding more, that you're coming into your field more. There was a bit more to your question, Alex, wasn't there? Let me get it again.
Yeah, there's another couple of comments about the map. So Anya says maybe bringing this map to the client also supports them to work on their uncertainty. Agnieszka says, obviously this map gives us also some areas of supervision conversation with the team coach. Alina asks if they can use your map. Do you
Yes.
have restrictions on it?
No, only so that you use one that's got a copyright name and my name on it and a date on it. It's available on my website and it will be available in the slides as well. But thank you for asking. I've got clients who use this and they take it to their clients all the time, and I'm delighted. And there's a paper that I've written that's on my website that elaborates on each of these different blobs that perhaps gives more detail to it. So
there's a question from France. He asks, what does normalizing exactly mean?
Human behavior. Franz, it's a great question. Thank you. Normalizing for me is that people may or may not like each other. Normalizing is that people may get on or they may not get on. Normalizing is that I may say something that offends, but my intention is not to offend. So normalizing of that human beings being with each other bump along, and we're never perfectly happy with each other all of the time, however tolerant, however unconditionally positive, regarding, loving and compassionate we may aspire to be. We can get annoyed, we can get irritated, we can get frightened, we can get happy, we can get sad, we can get angry. And that's what I mean, I guess, by the normalizing of human beings being human.
Alex had a
Maybe
few more
sorry.
questions about culture, and perhaps he'd like to ask the question himself rather than me reading it out. So Alex, would you like to ask your other question to Alison?
It wasn't really a question. It was more, you know, reflection, thinking there are, you know, there's a lot there. And I was thinking about what Anne was talking about the psychological elements. I am a specialist in culture, and I find, you know, you can extend the thoughts about how well trained are we in each of those, because there's a huge map there. And my guess is that none of us are perfectly trained in every aspect of that. So just thinking about which aspects of those do we each feel drawn to, which ones do we feel comfortable with, competent in even, and which ones actually maybe, and I'm saying this as a culture specialist, people make big assumptions about culture. How does it work? All those things, and perhaps they don't have any real expertise in culture, for example. So that might be a good reason to work with somebody else who has different specialism to you or brings a different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's lovely, Alex, because we have preferences, don't we? So Anne and I have known each other, and her question about psychological awareness, it comes from Anne's background. Culture is coming from your background. So we have an orientation and preferences, don't we? And I guess the question for each of us is, what are our gaps? What are the bits, I can't be bothered, not interested, that makes no difference? And
all the bits that we ignore, maybe, that we go, I really want to go there.
And I guess in psychological terms, it could be what's in our own shadow. What are we denying in ourselves that we may not want to see in a map that we might explore with a team and with the members of that team? So yeah, lovely observation, Alex. Thank you. How often does this human aspect of teaming get addressed during contracting with the stakeholders? Well, how often does it, Charlotte?
In my experience, not so often. It's mentioned on the side. It always is, because it's pro forma. That's what needs to be done. We mention it in a sentence or so. But in the process, in the doing, no, my experience is, you know, that goes along with the territory, but it's often overlooked. It's more about, you know, the structure, to set up the structure, and what is the outcome going to be? What is the expected outcome? So that's the usual modus operandi I'm finding. And I find this map very, very interesting, very, very complicated. And I'm feeling anxiety and uncertainty when I look at the map. But it's also a challenge.
Okay, that's really lovely, actually, Charlotte, because the question it brings up, your question about how often does contracting for the stakeholders, does it get mentioned in contracting? Where I go with that is how comfortable am I to bring it in as the practitioner? And if I'm anxious or nervous or self-conscious or worried that it won't be big enough, fast enough, clever enough for the client, I'll skirt and I'll bypass it. And oh, well, of course, it's all about relationships. So now let's get on. But I mean, I guess this is my orientation, my bias. I'll sit in the relationship stuff for hours and blow the structure, as you can see. So the client may not want to engage me because I'm less interested in how we're going to get from A to Z in 3 easy steps, because I'd rather stroll around Mount Everest and go to base camp. Looking at our relationships. So it comes back to Alex's point: where are our preferences, where are our orientations, where is our strength in our knowledge, and what are the gaps in our knowledge? Here's the main map that's absolutely overwhelming. I'm not going to play the PowerPoint slide for you. I hope everybody can see that. That's what we've just been looking at, yeah? So now what you can do, and coming back to Charlotte's question about, well, this looks quite complicated, we can drill down. Okay, let's have a look at what's going on for the coach. When I'm in supervision with a client, I'll say, okay, so what's going on for you? And we will have explored what's your relationship with change. What is your knowledge and skill of facilitating adult learning? What are your values and philosophy? How conscious are you of you as self as instrument and your presence? What knowledge and experience do you have of groups and group process? What are your own patterns in groups and how does that show up? What's your coaching style and capability? And what stage of development and maturity would you say you are at? So we could spend 2 hours just there. But the client, maybe the coach, may be happy clappy with how they are as a coach. And they may say, Alison, actually, I'm really worried about the contracting here. So let's have a look at. How did you go about contracting to begin with? What about recontracting? It sounds as though you may need to recontract. How many of you involved in the contracting? How many were involved? How many were engaged? How did you engage the team? What stopped you? What prevented you? What encouraged you? How did you set it up? Power and hierarchy. We come back to Alex's question about power and hierarchy in what happens with contracting. Who and how is the purpose of the work defined? What are the psychological levels of contracting? And what is it in your professional practice that informs you with your contracting? There's another 2-hour session. We can be here, you can see. So there's the culture. Let's have a look at the individual participants. Tell me about the members of the team, Charlotte. What are their personality preferences? What are their learning styles? What are their stages of adult development? What are their team roles, functional, formal, psychological? And what are their personal motivations? Now, does this slow it down a little bit for you to give you the detail? Because yes, the face map, it's a bit like looking at a map of the UK or the map of North America and saying, well, where the heck should we start? And I'm saying, well, let's go to Connecticut first, or let's go to Hertfordshire first and have a look at one or another of these. So tell me about the leader. What's their history? What's explicit and implicit? Where are they in terms of seniority, power, and authority? How would I evaluate their presence, their nominal and dispersed leadership, their internal and external role, and their leadership of the team? And these are to open this pathway in the forest before we go on and look at something else. There's no one right place to start. but I hope that gives you some clarity then. And I guess the what I'm wanting to demonstrate is this is the slowing down, because yes, there's a huge amount at face level on the map and we can't get through it all. I'm pausing because I'm looking at the clock and making sure we're all right for time, and we may not have time for the case study. So let me pause. How are folks doing? What's emerging for you? And what other questions may be coming?
Listen, thank you so much. Less of a question rather than an observation. But really, when you talk about it being a practice, it really is a practice to be able to hold a whole system and slow down. And, you know, with your feet on the ground and your heart wide open to sort of enable this kind of co-creative slowing down and exploration as a key part of then what becomes any contracting, you know, because then we're going in with our eyes wide open versus kind of jumping in and then finding that whatever we've created is too narrow or doesn't fit or not fit for purpose, etc., etc.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, that's lovely, Carissa, because I'm smiling because so often in supervision somebody will come and say, "Oh, Alison, I've got my first team coaching assignment and I'm so excited." And it's gorgeous to see the enthusiasm and the excitement and the terror about how on earth are we going to do this, and what are the things that I need to put in place, and how do I manage this and not get hooked into the client's urgency for results, for return on investment, for key performance indicators, for achievement. Where in certainly perhaps in the Western world more than others, that our ability to demonstrate results is frighteningly obsessive, I find. And maybe I'm in my tender years now, I'm thinking, well, I'd rather be in relationship and that's the result, rather than getting the client from A to B to C. And I realize for many of you, you're in organizational context, in corporate environments where results are the be all and end all, and it puts us under huge pressure. So I guess maybe that was where my title of the session came from, which was Sitting with Uncertainty. So I'm just wondering now, if we were in the room, I'd be looking at you, Cheryl. We've got half an hour, with a tight half an hour, for those of you who can stay. I think it was billed as 90 minutes with a half an hour. We can do a case study now if you would like to. So can I have a show of hands? How many of you would like to dive into a breakout? I'll read you a case study and do it. Spend 15 minutes looking at how what you might be dealing with. Can I have a show of hands? Okay, there's lots of energy for that. Thank you very much. So I'm going to read this case study. It's a bit mucky, but this is an adaptation of a live experience, and it's been anonymized for protection of the people who may or may not have been part of it. I've been working with my supervisee, Jane, for about 2 years, meeting every 6 to 8 weeks. She's an experienced, accredited one-to-one coach with an MBA as well as supervision training. Prior to developing her coaching practice, she worked as a management consultant in a leading global consultancy and has a very strong theoretical knowledge of change models. Our last session was in early January, and just before one of the workshops mentioned below, when we explored how she might approach that workshop, and I haven't seen her for 3 months. Jane arrived at Supervision in April, so 3 or 4 months later, and after the first 15 minutes in the room, she said, "I'm overwhelmed. I don't feel supported. I'm out of my depth, and I don't think I'm competent to do this work. On a personal level, I've been traveling non-stop for the past 3 months, staying away from home at least 1 or 2 nights a week. At the same time, my 87-year-old father has been hospitalized, and my mother is extremely stressed with all of this. They live in Singapore, and I'm an only child, so no other relatives live alone locally, let alone locally. I'm an associate of a consultancy that's based in the US. I'm based in the UK, where I have a public sector team coaching assignment, and I've been having fortnightly supervision with George, the principal of the consultancy who engaged me, which is why I haven't been to see you, Alison. The client brief is to work with an executive leadership team in this organization of 85 people, because it's not working well together, and the overall purpose of the assignment has been defined as build team cohesion. This project outcome must be achieved by the end of June, a procurement requirement, otherwise all funding will be withdrawn for subsequent work. There is some uncertainty about whether this unit will continue to receive funding for their existence, and the changes may be activated sometime during the next year. Gosh, it's messy. So far, are you with me? How do we hold all of that already? The 8 members of this team are geographically separate. Some are in London, where the CEO is based. Others are in Birmingham, Cardiff, and Edinburgh. In the London office, the CEO sits with his team in an open plan office and is readily accessible and approachable. He encourages his people to come and have conversation with him. The whole team meets virtually once a week. In December, when the project began, this is Jane talking, I started with some one-to-one coaching with CEO and the individual members. Since then, I've done one day and 1 2-day workshop, and amongst other things, we've covered Lencioni and Honey and Mumford learning styles. I would describe their behavior as avoidant rather than competitive, and from what I've seen, they lack accountability and responsibility and look to the CEO for decisions. I've done top team assignments before, when the top team may be dysfunctional, but know how to do this stuff. This team doesn't have a clue. They sit there waiting for them to tell me what to do. At the 2-day residential workshop, they didn't even understand why they should have dinner together, as some wanted to get back to their families. At this dinner, I asked one of them when they were getting married, and no one else at the table knew that their colleague was getting married. At this point, I asked Jane to stop, to pause for breath while I gathered my breath. I'm exhausted by the story she was telling by this stage. So, there are some questions for you to discuss, and you don't have to discuss all of them. Choose a question in your breakout. And the questions are, what are the questions? So the questions, what are you holding that haven't been answered about the team, the wider system, about Jane, and what suggestions might you offer to Jane to ground herself, find her center, take the next step? And then how might I, as her supervisor, respond to Jane, and what's my role here? Too much for you to get through. I'm going to give you about 10 or 12 minutes in the breakout to have a chatter with your colleagues about what on earth was that all about. But maybe there's a parallel process there. The parallel process of the supervision, of the woman who comes into supervision, of what I'm trying to get through in this session with all of you, and we're running out of time and I'm getting short of breath and excited and hot. And so, I'm going to give you 12 minutes to 1/4 That's about 1/4 for you to come back. We may not have time to review it, but have a think about it. You've got a map to look at. You've got these questions in the case study. What are the things you're grappling with in this context?
Well, there was a lot of uncertainty in our group, whether the coach was even in the right place in herself to do the piece of work. And then there was the question, what would that mean if she was to decide, actually, no, I'm not? We felt that she wasn't getting the support of you, Alison, that it seemed like could support her. So there was a lot of questions we were left with.
Great. Good. Thank you very much, Anne. Yes. Good.
In our group, we talked about, first of all, taking care of the team coach, finding a way to get her more grounded, because there's all these things going on as well in her life, and traveling and parents and so on and so on, just to slow her down and get her grounded. And also to go back, maybe rather than get involved in more context and asking her more details, to go back to the contracting and what is expected of her. What did she sign up for? It sounded like she was doing facilitation training on Lencioni's pyramid or whatever, but what's the purpose of all that? In fact, so to go back to the contracting, basically.
Good. Okay. And you don't need to be, I've heard that's really nice that you come in, Elaine. I spent 3 weeks in a program of workshops and still never discovered how to put my technological hand up. So anybody else? Thank you.
Yeah, we just wondered that, just following on from that potential need to recontract, whether rather than recontracting for team coaching right now, it might be worth doing some more training around leading with emotional intelligence, that sort of thing. To buy her a bit more time, but also it would mean that hopefully when they did come to team coaching later, the team would be better equipped to work together and do that.
Great. Lovely. So we've got 3 different angles already, haven't we? Anya.
What comes to me is connect first and contract. And connect, we discussed many different possibilities, including normalizing. Wow, you're telling me so many things. I'm already overwhelmed. Can you deal with that? And strategies to slow down, ground, and all this stuff.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm certainly driven by the time limitation that she has to actually do anything. And here we are in April and she's coming to you for supervision and she's only got till the end of June. Surely the ethical thing to do would be to say, thank you very much, I can't take on this particular assignment, and use the reason of her family being ill to leave and hand over to somebody else who could do it.
Thank you. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because team coaching is growing in popularity, growing in profile, growing in quote unquote importance. And people are getting hooked into, oh, I'd love to do this. And somehow some folks may think it is more lucrative. So there's an economic decision to be taken or considered, and how often might we take the work when we may not be ready or equipped or resourced enough, or it's an unrealistic expectation. So look, we didn't touch on that sort of subsection of the ethical dilemma that the coach may have. Do I do the work? Am I fit to do the work? Is this the work that is really needed? I think and when we're hooked into the enthusiasm and the, oh, I'd love to do this, it's quite hard to say, steady on, steady on. Thank you. Anyone else? And there is the issue of supervision by the principle of the consultancy, which may be more line management than coaching supervision. Yeah, well, I threw that one in, Alex, because I reckon I think there is a boundary issue around supervise as the consultancy.
Exactly.
Yes. Supervising associates or supervising the consulting team. I have a real issue over the boundaries of safety for the coach.
Yes, and the pressure that she's being put under to get this piece of work in a particular time, all of that stuff, which you also raised, Andrew. Yes. It's clearly not supervision, or at least not as we would understand it. No. It's what supervision work means differently. It's different things inside organizations, but yeah.
Well, folks, it's been a joy to be with you all. Thank you very much for coming, whatever time of day or night or morning or afternoon it is for you. Rosie and Cheryl from EMCC, thank you so much for supporting me and hosting us. And for those of you I haven't seen for a million years, like Alex, it's been wonderful to see those of you I do know, and wonderful to see some of you that I've not met before. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you found this thought-provoking and left you with more questions than answers, because that, I think, is what learning is about. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Alison. I think we've got lots of juicy material to explore in supervision and reflect on, and really appreciate this session. I just want to remind everybody that the slides and the reading list Alison mentioned have been shared in the chat. You can download them now, and you will get the recording afterwards as well. Thank you so much for those of you that stayed till the very end and joined in and contributed. There were some wonderful questions and reflections, and really appreciate your participation. I look forward to seeing you at future EMCC global events, and a very heartfelt thank you to Alison for sharing these 2 hours with us. Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you everyone for your contribution.